The rain drummed against the concrete steps of the 14th precinct like a relentless metronome, each drop echoing through the empty streets of downtown Chicago. It was nearly midnight, and the city had settled into its uneasy sleep, leaving only the occasional siren wailing in the distance and the soft hum of fluorescent lights bleeding through the station's windows. Curled against the cold stone steps, a figure lay motionless beneath a threadbare blanket. The homeless man had been there for months now, appearing each evening like clockwork. No cardboard sign pleading for help, no outstretched hand seeking coins. Just silence, wrapped in layers of worn clothing and dignity that somehow persevered despite his circumstances. The officers had nicknamed him Ghost, not out of cruelty, but because he seemed to exist in a space between worlds. He never caused trouble, never spoke, never asked for anything. He simply was, like a phantom who had chosen their doorstep as his eternal resting place. But Ghost wasn't alone. Pressed against his side, sharing the meager warmth of the thin blanket, was a dog, a German shepherd with graying fur around his muzzle and eyes that held the weight of countless stories. The dog's breathing was steady and deep, his massive frame serving as both pillow and protector for the man beside him. Inside the station, the night shift was winding down. Officer Martinez yawned as she filed her last report, while Sergeant Williams checked the overnight incident log. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the tired faces of the skeleton crew that kept the precinct running through the dark hours. Captain Elena Ramirez gathered her things from her desk, her jacket heavy with the weight of another long day. She'd been running the 14th precinct for 5 years now, and the job had aged her in ways that went beyond the silver threads now woven through her black hair. Every case, every call, every decision carried the weight of lives in her hands. As she pushed through the front doors, the cold November air hit her like a physical blow. The rain had intensified, turning the sidewalk into a river of reflected streetlights. She pulled her coat tighter and headed toward her car, keys already in hand. Then she saw them. Ghost and his dog were huddled against the wall, completely soaked. The thin blanket had become a sodden weight, offering no protection against the elements. Water dripped from the man's hair, ran down his face, and pooled around his worn boots. Yet he remained still, accepting the punishment of the storm with the same quiet dignity he showed every night. But it was the dog that made Ramirez pause. The German shepherd was trying to shield the man with his own body, his fur plastered against his frame. But his eyes held an intelligence and loyalty that spoke of something more than a simple bond between a homeless man and his pet. Something familiar. Ramirez found herself walking toward them, her footsteps echoing in the empty street. The dog's ears perked up as she approached, but he didn't move away. Instead, he seemed to study her with those ancient, knowing eyes. "Easy, boy," she said softly, crouching down. "I'm not going to hurt you." The dog's tail gave the slightest wag, and in that moment, Ramirez saw something that made her breath catch. Around the dog's neck was a collar, not the cheap nylon kind you'd find at any pet store, but a heavy leather collar with a metal tag that caught the streetlight. With trembling fingers, she reached out and gently turned the tag toward the light. The words etched into the metal were faded but still legible, and as she read them aloud, her voice barely above a whisper, the world seemed to shift around her. Officer Charlie Mendez, K-9 unit, fallen but not forgotten. The rain continued to fall, But Ramirez no longer felt it. Charlie Mendez. She knew that name. Every officer in the city knew that name. He'd been killed in the line of duty 10 years ago, shot during a hostage rescue at a downtown bank. The department had mourned him as a hero, held a massive funeral with full honors, and erected a memorial plaque in the precinct's main hallway. But there had been another tragedy that day. Charlie's K9 partner, a German shepherd named Shadow, had vanished after the funeral. The dog had been inconsolable, refusing to eat, refusing to work with any other handler. During the burial service, Shadow had somehow slipped his lead and disappeared into the city. Despite extensive searches, he was never found. The department had assumed he'd died, unable to cope with the loss of his partner. But here he was, 10 years later, still wearing Charlie's collar. Still alive, still loyal. Ramirez looked at the man sleeping beside the dog, and suddenly, the pieces began to fall into place. Ghost wasn't just any homeless man. There was something about his build, his posture, even in sleep. Something that nagged at her memory. She rushed back into the station, her wet shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor. The night shift looked up in surprise as she hurried past, heading straight for the filing cabinets in the basement. Her hands shook as she pulled out the folder marked Mendez Charles, Line of Duty Death. The file was thick with reports, photographs, and commendations. Charlie had been an exemplary officer, just 28 years old when he died. Unmarried, but not alone. The file mentioned family, parents who had moved to Florida after his death, unable to bear the memories, and a younger brother, David Mendez. Also a police officer, a rookie who had graduated from the academy just 2 months before Charlie's death. The file noted that David had taken leave immediately after the funeral and never returned to duty. His whereabouts were listed as unknown. With growing certainty, Ramirez pulled out the photographs. There was Charlie in his dress uniform, smiling at the camera with Shadow beside him. And there, in the background of one of the funeral photos, was a younger man with the same dark hair, the same strong jaw, the same eyes. David Mendez, Charlie's little brother. The man they'd been calling Ghost. Ramirez sank into a chair, the full weight of the revelation hitting her. For 10 years, David had been living on the streets, carrying the grief of his brother's death like a stone in his chest. And Shadow, loyal, devoted Shadow, had found him somehow, had chosen to stay with the last piece of Charlie's family rather than move on. The dog wasn't just protecting a homeless man, he was protecting his fallen partner's brother. The rain had stopped by the time Ramirez returned to the steps, but Ghost and Shadow were still there, still huddled together. This time she didn't hesitate. She knelt beside them and gently placed a hand on the man's shoulder. "David," she said softly. "David Mendez." The man's eyes opened slowly, confused and wary. He hadn't heard his name spoken aloud in years. "I know who you are," Ramirez continued, her voice gentle but firm. "I know about Charlie. I know about Shadow. And I know you've been carrying this alone for too long." David's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in a decade, he spoke. His voice was rough from disuse, barely above a whisper. "He was supposed to be safe," he said. "Charlie was supposed to be safe. I was the rookie. I was the one who should have been in danger, not him." "That's not how it works," Ramirez replied. "Charlie died doing what he loved, protecting people. But he wouldn't want you to throw your life away because of it." Shadow pressed closer to David, as if sensing the emotion in the air. The dog's presence seemed to give David strength, and he slowly sat up, looking at the captain with eyes that held both pain and hope. "I couldn't go back," David said. "Every time I put on the uniform, every time I walked into a station, I saw his face. I heard his voice. The guilt was eating me alive." "So you ran," Ramirez said, not judging, just stating fact. "I ran, and somehow Shadow found me. He'd been searching the city, looking for Charlie, and when he found me, instead—" David's voice broke. "He never left. For 10 years, he's been taking care of me when I couldn't take care of myself." The next morning brought a transformation to the 14th precinct. Word had spread quickly through the department about Ghost's true identity, and officers arrived to find something that hadn't been there the night before. A wooden bench sat beside the front steps, sturdy and weathered, as if it had always belonged there. Draped across it was a folded police jacket, not David's old uniform, but a new one, in the right size, with a brass nameplate that read D. Mendez. Beside it sat 2 steaming cups of coffee and a dog bowl filled with fresh water. David sat on the bench, clean-shaven for the first time in years, his hair trimmed and his clothes replaced with simple but clean civilian attire. Shadow lay at his feet, his tail wagging slightly as officers began to arrive for the day shift. The first officer to spot them was Martinez, the young patrolwoman who'd been filing reports the night before. She stopped short, recognizing the homeless man she'd seen every day for months. But now somehow, he looked different. He looked like he belonged. "Good morning, Officer Martinez," David said, his voice stronger now, more confident. She blinked in surprise. "You know my name?" "I know all your names," David replied with a small smile. "I've been watching over this place for a long time." More officers began to gather, drawn by the unusual sight. Captain Ramirez emerged from the station, carrying a folder and wearing an expression of quiet satisfaction. "Officers," she called out, her voice carrying the authority of command. "I'd like you to meet David Mendez. Some of you may remember his brother Charlie, who died in the line of duty 10 years ago. David has been taking some time to process his grief, but he's ready to come home now." The assembled officers looked at David with new understanding. The homeless man they'd passed every day, the one they'd called Ghost, was one of their own. A brother in blue who had lost his way, but never lost his dedication to protecting others. Sergeant Williams, a veteran with 25 years on the force, was the first to step forward. He snapped to attention and delivered a crisp salute. "Welcome home, brother," he said. One by one, the other officers followed suit. Martinez saluted, tears in her eyes. Thompson, the desk sergeant, removed his cap and held it over his heart. Even the tough old detectives from the second floor had come down to pay their respects. David stood slowly, shadow rising beside him. For the first time in 10 years, he returned their salutes, his back straight, his shoulders squared, the ghost of the young officer he'd once been shining through. "I'm not ready to wear the uniform again," he said, his voice carrying to every officer present. "Maybe I never will be, but I want to help. I want to serve, and I want to make sure that what happened to Charlie, that his sacrifice means something." Captain Ramirez opened the folder she'd been carrying. "The department has a position opening in victim services. It's civilian work, but it's important. Helping people who've been through trauma, who've lost loved ones to violence. You'd be good at it, David. You understand their pain." David nodded, understanding the gift he was being offered. A chance to serve without carrying a weapon. A chance to help others heal, even as he continued to heal himself. "I'd like that," he said. "I'd like that very much." As the crowd began to disperse, officers heading into the station to begin their shifts, many stopped to shake David's hand or pat Shadow's head. The dog accepted the attention with dignity, his tail wagging more freely than it had in years. Officer Martinez lingered, studying Shadow with curiosity. "How did you know?" she asked David. "How did you know he was Charlie's partner?" David smiled, the first genuine smile he'd worn in a decade. "I didn't at first. When Shadow found me, I was in a bad place. Really bad. I'd been on the streets for months, drinking, fighting, basically waiting to die. Then this dog shows up, skin and bones, obviously lost and scared. But he wouldn't leave me alone. He reached down to scratch Shadow behind the ears, and the dog leaned into the touch with obvious contentment. It took me weeks to recognize him. He was so thin, so different from the strong, proud dog I remembered from Charlie's funeral. But one night, I was having a nightmare, the same one I'd been having for months about the day Charlie died. I woke up screaming, and Shadow was there, doing this thing." David paused, his eyes distant with memory. "Charlie used to have panic attacks sometimes. Job stress, you know? And Shadow would do this thing where he'd put his head on Charlie's chest and just stay there. Steady breathing, steady heartbeat. It was like he was anchoring Charlie to the world." "And he did the same for you?" "He did the same for me. That's when I knew. That's when I realized that Charlie had sent him to me somehow, to keep me alive, to keep me from giving up completely." Martinez wiped her eyes, not caring if her colleagues saw her cry. "What now?" "I mean, for both of you?" David looked at Shadow, then at the station, then at the officers, still visible through the windows. "Now we keep going. We keep serving. We keep Charlie's memory alive by helping others." The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the precinct steps. The bench, already bearing the small brass plaque that read, "In memory of Officer Charles Mendez and all who serve," seemed to glow in the golden light. From that day forward, the bench became a landmark. Citizens would stop by to thank officers for their service. Fellow cops would take their breaks there, sharing stories and finding comfort in the presence of David and Shadow. Children would pet the gentle German shepherd while their parents spoke with the quiet man, who seemed to understand loss better than anyone. And every evening, as the sun set over the city, David would sit on that bench with Shadow beside him, watching over the 14th precinct, not as a ghost anymore, but as a guardian, a brother watching over his family, making sure they all made it home safe. The homeless man was gone. In his place sat a hero, not the kind who wore a uniform or carried a badge, but the kind who understood that sometimes the greatest service is simply being there, watching over those who watch over others. And beside him, always beside him, sat Shadow, no longer lost, no longer searching, but finally, after 10 long years, home.